You're listening to Life Check Yourself with life coach, transformational leader, and dating and relationship badass, Marni Battista. Every week, you'll get the raw truth from top experts and real people on the important life and love issues you want to know about. So if you're ready to life check yourself in your relationships, your career, and the areas of your life that matter most to you, and you're not afraid to be called out on your stuff, then you're ready for what's next.
Life Check Yourself with Crystal DeSantis, 7 behaviors that destroy relationships. Ladies, welcome. I'm super excited for you today. So many listeners are like, what do men have to listen to? Are they working on themselves? They're confused and they feel like they're doing all the work, which is why I have Crystal DeSantis here today. She is a Texas licensed marriage and family therapist. She is the author of Strong, a relationship field guide for the modern man. So yes, to answer your question, this book guides readers with her expertise gained from her extensive work with high-performing men and couples. She has a background as a certified sex therapy-informed professional and clinically certified trauma professional, and you all are going to love this conversation. So I want to first start talking about this whole masculine, feminine thing. And it's really interesting because I have 3 daughters who are in their early to late 20s in relationships. And I wonder, like, do they have a different understanding of like gender roles? Are we the ones who are sort of like holding this confused state because we were raised by homemakers, but we also didn't become often just homemakers ourselves. Some people did, and talked to a woman at my reunion the last weekend who's like feels bad that she let go of her law career to raise her kids, right? So what's going on right now, Crystal?
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion right now with, gender roles and marriage and family and, what are the rules these days between men and women. And we are kind of the generation on that frontier where the old rules of relationships worked for a very specific period of time, right? Where the men were the breadwinners and the women were the homemakers. And it was kind of, this is what you did, or at least that's the image, because when you actually look into it, I mean, women have been working since the dawn of time, right? It's really since the Industrial Revolution that it became this idea that men go out and, bring home the bacon and the women, raise the kids. And so when it came to marriages, there was almost like this script that if you were wife, you followed wife's script. If you were husband, you followed husband's script. And now with, gender equality and women can vote, women can choose to have children and be stay-at-home moms, or they can choose to have careers, or they can choose to do both. It's really kind of blown open the landscape of choice. And the paradox of choice is that when everything is on the table, how do you make the right choice for yourself? And how do you navigate those choices with a partner, right? Because women's liberation kind of put it all out on the table for women. Like, you can be anything. You can be a homemaker. You can decide to try to be president. You can do whatever you want. But for men, the script was still fairly narrow. It's still not that common for a man to say, maybe I'll be a stay-at-home dad, right? It is becoming more common, but that is still where men, sometimes, and I think like you just mentioned, if men are going to do the work of being equal partners, what does that even look like? And a lot of the questions I hear from men is, what do women actually want from a man these days? Like, do they want us to just go out and pay the bills, or do they want us to be present, equal parents? Like, what do we want, right?
Well, this is an interesting question because I used to do this talk, and it was really confusing when you talk about like the power play between men and women, right? And so many women in our generation were raised with this like Disney thing, right? And they're tired, they're working their asses off, and they're like, I just want a guy to make some decisions and like be leaders, right? And then these men are showing up in their relationships, and the women are like, so this is what we're doing, this is how it's going, do it my way. And they're like, I'm so confused. Like, and then they're mad that they're not like taking this role and being strong, right?
Totally.
So help us with this one.
Yeah. So that's really why I wrote my book and why I called the model strong, because I wanted to emphasize is, there is still a desire. Women still have a desire for masculine men to show up and be strong. But the way strength is presented in a man these days needs to be slightly different than it was in the years past, right? And so I talk about, in the preface of my book, I talk about the 3 Ps of masculinity. That was, an anthropological study where this anthropologist, he went to all these different societies and he pulled men from, various different societies. And what he found was men tended to inhabit their masculinity in 3 different roles: being the protector, being the provider, and being the procreator, right? And so, I think many people who are listening to this, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, protect, provide, and then procreate, which is, and so I wanted to honor that in writing this book. Like, you can still be a protector, you can still be a provider, you can still be a procreator, but the modern woman wants those roles slightly differently than maybe the women in the past, right? So you go back to the caveman days and, a man who could beat up all the other men in the village and fight off the lions, like physical protection was very important. But now, in a modern society, is that really the highest value guy, the guy that's going to be able to beat up the whole neighborhood in a fight, right? Or what does protection actually look like in a modern relationship? Same thing with provision, right? In the past, it was the guy with the biggest paycheck got, the highest value in the dating marketplace. But now, what else might a man provide to a family if, let's say his wife has a equally high earning job? Like, is the man then redundant? Or, how can he be a provider if he's not providing financial paycheck, right? And so expanding the definition of protection, provision, and then also procreation, right? It's not enough to just make the babies. Now it's, what can you do to be a present parent in helping raise them? So that's really what I wanted to articulate in this book of like, women still want strong masculine men. We still want protectors, providers, procreators, men. You're still valuable and needed in all of those roles, but let's modernize what that actually looks like in practice and in relationship.
So let's talk about this one too, because I see a lot of women also saying like, I want this guy's emotionally intelligent that can talk about his feelings. And then the minute he's like admitting a vulnerability or is frustrated or is upset or scared, she's like, fucking man up, like da-da-da. And I was at this reunion. So it was really interesting because there was men there that had been married for 25 years. There were some single men that were divorced. And so I had this conversation and the guys that were single were like, I'm working on myself. I've gone to therapy, I've got, and then I want to share like what I'm going through. And they're like, nah, I don't want to hear that. I just want you to be, again, strong, right? So how as women because I feel like there's some stuff that we have to do, right? Because we're just going to miss the mark on really healthy, amazing relationships if we have conflicting ideals of what we say we want and then who's showing up.
Absolutely. And that's, where, like you were saying earlier, like the masculine and the feminine, there's a dynamic that, if one part changes, the other part needs to change as well. And, we're in this together. And I definitely talk about that a lot in my work and even in the book of, if we're asking men to be more vulnerable, what are we doing as women to provide the safety for them to be vulnerable and be human, right? Or are we expecting heroes? And this is also like the work I do with first responders is like, how can we allow men to be human and also the hero that, we need them to be sometimes, but it's not either or, the humanity is welcome. Because at the end of the day, too, as women, that also challenges us to inhabit our own humanity a little bit more fully. right? And so this is also where it's like not every man or woman just by default of gender is going to be a healthy or unhealthy individual. But I think there is a movement, like you said, of maybe the younger generation starting to look a little bit more closely into, how do I want to be in relationship? In the past, maybe being in a relationship was just a default. Everybody would end up married at some point. Everybody would end up, and now with the recognition that, no, this is an intentional choice that can impact the course of your life, the success and the failure of, your businesses and, your mental health, and choosing a life partner is going to be one of the most important choices you can make. So let's go into it with a level of intentionality and dedication and commitment, rather than just defaulting, when the music stops and you hit a certain age, you're like, I guess this one,
Oh my gosh. I think I did that when I panicked. I was like 22 and I'm like, oh, well, he called me back. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about love languages redefined, because this is like, and I also would love to know what you think about like attachment theory and all these things, because when I was just doing dating coaching, people would come in and they'd be like, this is my love language, and I'm an anxious, and like, this is who I am. Help me do this. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, is this something that we can change? So talk to me about reimagining love languages.
Yeah, so the word STRONG actually is an acronym for the 6 pillars, the 6 core ingredients needed in a strong relationship. So I kind of play off of that. Strong is healthy, right? So when people say, what is a healthy relationship? So, the number one love language is feeling safe. So that's the S. That's the absolute foundation. And one of the things, my book talks, is kind of a guide for men. And this is something that women know, but not a lot of men know, that safety is such an important thing to women, right? And it's such a big concept. But when a man can show up and make his partner feel safe, and of course, the women, making their men feel safe as well, but safety is that kind of core feeling of, I belong here, I am protected, I feel loved, I feel cared for. So that's kind of the first piece of the STRONG model is safety.
And tell me about all of those other sort of like, so acts of service and physical touch. Do those hold true? Do they still hold?
They do. And I actually have them in G. So, sometimes when it comes to, love languages, like you said, is people are like, well, this is my thing. And what I found was that it really is kind of the dessert at the end of the meal. Like if you don't have safety, and that's like the core, the protein, you can do all the acts of service you want and the relationship will still be on shaky ground. So the G is generosity, and the generosity is how can you embody love in the way that your partner receives it, not just in the way you want to give it. I talk about the platinum rule versus the golden rule. The golden rule is do unto others what you would have them do unto you. The platinum rule is no, give them what they want, not what you want. So it's just that little upgrade.
I love that one because I remember like early on with my husband. So I'm a gifts person or acts of service. And so I would get these gifts for my husband when we were like early on in a relationship, and he'd be like, thanks. And I was like, wait, it's not the same thing, right? And so for him, like he loves chocolate, me buying him like a jumbo bag, like from Costco of peanut M&Ms. Do you know what I mean? Like that was like $4.99 or whatever. He was like, wow, thanks. Right. Yeah. Because that was like something that he really cared about more than like, just like there's a gift and it's a flashy thing, whatever. That's not how he receives love. And so I think this is so interesting because we just assume that people experience love the same way as we do. So we have to really hone in on how does our person want to receive this, or what makes them feel loved.
Absolutely. And that's, really that's kind of the struggle of a long-term relationship, is remembering that the other person is different from you and, continuously making room in your brain for that fact. Right. I see so many people that, get into conflict, and I talk about the assumption of similarity, right? Well, I wouldn't have acted that way. Well, I like this, they should like this, right? And the assumption that we're more similar than we are different. And sometimes those differences can cause pain and conflict. But when we acknowledge and celebrate them, then that becomes a totally beautiful thing of saying, like, this person is so different than me. They see the world differently. They inhabit the world differently. They experience love differently. And look at us. We're figuring it out together, because love is a choice at the end of the day. Right?
My husband and I are watching Love is Blind UK currently. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen that? Love is Blind?
So good.
So good. Yeah. And so my husband's like, this is so, manipulative. They throw these people in here and then they're like, wait, you have a dog named Rover? I have a dog named Rover. We have everything in common. Mm-hmm. Let's get married, right? But I think that this is what happens when we're dating, right? We're like, and we're so good at doing this, like, socially anyway, right? Like, trying to find points of interest. And because most people, it seems like, are ruling people out rather than ruling people in. The second there's something that there's similarity, they're like, oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. And then we assume, that then everything about this person is the same. Can you sort of address that a little bit, and how we can navigate through that?
Yeah. And that's, it's interesting because there's something also about limerence, which is the stage of falling in love, right? Our brains, the chemicals are like, going a little bit wild. And so we want to place a lot of weight in, like, oh, you like long walks on the beach? Me too. Like, coffee? Oh my God, So I think there's something to also be said of, like, our brains are a little bit, working for the relationship, maybe against us at that point. But, and Esther Perel, you probably know that name, right? And she talks about the difference between a love story and a life story. And I really love to highlight that difference of, like, dating for companionship, dating for similarity, dating for, like, we like the same things at whatever phase in life is fine. And that can be a beautiful love story. But when you're trying to have a long-term partnership, making sure that you can talk about the differences between you. There's openness to acknowledge the differences between you, and that your partnership has the structure that it needs to continue to celebrate the differences between the two of you. Because again, you might get together at 25, or you're in a similar stage of life in college, you're both in college, you both love gummy bears and bad TV. But the people that you're going to be at 35 or 45 or as parents or as grandparents are going to be so different. So continuing to build that openness into the relationship from the beginning and saying, we're not just relying on our superficial similarities. We are looking for, celebrating, and navigating our differences in a way that makes us both feel safe to be our full selves in this relationship.
That's so beautiful. So can you give me some examples of some of the ways this strong model has impacted in a positive way the relationships where men are like, I need to figure this shit out? With a man brain, by the way, I think that's always so interesting, we're like, I used to coach men for like 5 minutes when I was doing dating coaching, and the men would just be like, just tell me what to do. It was so, and the women would be like, are you sure? Da, da, da. It was like all this stuff, and guys were just like, let me just get this shit done. What do you want me to do next? So talk to me about, like, how does this impact a relationship, and what are the men doing differently that's working?
Yeah. And that's part of why I wanted to just put it all out there in this book and be like, here's a guide, it's all laid out. One of the biggest things that I use often with couples, and the men really resonate with, is what I call the 4 positions of conversation.
Okay. So, I thought you were going to say the 4 sex positions. But,
well,
that's in there I
do talk about the 2 different types of desire.
Okay, we'll talk about
that. But the 4 positions of conversation, which is acknowledging, like you just said, with men, like the way their brains are, but also the way they're socialized, is when they talk to each other, they give each other solutions or they debate. All right. This is typically kind of male bonding patterns of conversation. With women, again, this is very broad strokes, and women are capable of all and men are capable of all. But generally, when women speak to each other, we get the listening, right? Just, I'm holding space for you. I'm so sorry you're having a bad day. And then the joining, which is the empathy, like, oh my God, girl, no, that same thing happened to me. Like, you're not crazy. I'm here with you in your experience, right? So listening and joining. And then for men, it's fixing, right? Well, have you tried blank? Or debating, which is, is it really that bad? I mean, I tried it. It wasn't that hard. And this is one of the things that causes so much conflict between couples. And so that just laying that out and telling men specifically, and women too, but make sure you're in the same conversation. So start with position 1, which is listening. If that feels good, then you can move to position 2, which is joining, right? And then, and this is where men are like, and that's it. I just say, so sorry you're having a bad day. I hear you. That sucks. That's it. And sometimes, again, being able to say like, yes, sometimes that's it. But sometimes also when you say that, then it allows your partner to be ready to hear the solution that you have to offer. Right. And maybe then they could be ready to hear an alternative perspective. But if your wife is here and you're starting here, there's going to be an immediate clash. Right.
100%. I'm always like telling my husband, I'm like, he's like, it's like his mantra. He's like, acknowledge, validate, acknowledge, validate. Like, yes. Remember to do that first.
Totally.
And it's hard because it's so not natural. Mm-hmm. But it's funny. I actually was, when I moved into this place that we're renting, my landlord is a great guy. And there was a missed expectation, right? Mm-hmm. So I got here and I was like, what the hell? Like, this is surprising to me. And the first thing he said was like, oh my God, I can totally understand how shocked you are right now. This was not what, and I was like, damn, you're making this conversation totally different right now. Mm-hmm. And it was so great. And I was like, well played, my friend. Well played.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it's, I do also put in my book, that's the thing, I really wanted to focus on skills. I have a page that's like empathy phrases bingo. So it's like, just, pick a square, say an encouraging thing, because really sometimes that's all that's needed, right? Is that acknowledgement, that validation, maybe a hug, and then we can move on.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So good. Okay. Let's talk about sex.
Yes.
Let's talk about desire. Oh my God. I got this meme from my husband because he sends me funny memes. Well, sometimes I don't think they're funny, but he's British, so he just gets a free pass. And it was like 2 gorillas. Right. Mm-hmm. And the guy is literally like grabbing her nipple and like, doing some other thing. And it's like foreplay for men, in a long-term relationship. And I was like, that's funny. Right. Cause I'm always like, where's the romance, bro?
Yes. Yes.
So what are you teaching men about female desire in this book that would be helpful? Yeah. So we can all get laid.
Absolutely. Well, I think this is really this is the work of Emily Nagoski that I use, where she talks about the 2 different types of desire. There's spontaneous, which is more common among men, right? It's like, my body is ready, let's go. Whereas responsive desire is the pleasure first model. So there has to be pleasure experienced first. There has to be the context first. And then desire arises in response to the positive and pleasurable stimuli, right? And so that's a big, huge difference that, women more generally identify with being the responsive type of desire. And of course, there are overlaps, right? There are people, but whenever I see desire discrepancy, it's often that, what did you do to help set up the environment so that sex was something that she could be invited into, rather than, I like to use food metaphors for this, right? So it's like, if you ask somebody if they're hungry and they're like, I don't know, I'm not super hungry. I can't, got a lot of things to do. I don't know if I have time. But if you make just come over to my place, I'm going to start pouring a glass of wine. I'm going to, start cooking, and then you start smelling the good smells, and then, the music is on, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, I'm starving.
Right.
Right. And now I'm like really excited about this pleasurable experience, as opposed to just like every once in a while, somebody rolls a can of beans towards you and you're like, okay.
Oh my God.
you know?
I love it. The beans. Don't be rolling me no beans.
Yes. And of course, this is also where women too could, I encourage them to like take a little bit of initiative. Like, what does it take to get you in the mood? Like, he's not a mind reader. He doesn't automatically know if he doesn't have the same desire profile, if he's more spontaneous than responsive, he might, again, not exactly know how to get you in the mood without crossing a line. And so being able to have these conversations as well of, are you receptive to being invited into pleasure? Right? And then can you give verbal feedback as to what feels pleasurable, how you experience pleasure? Can you also, again, it doesn't have to be initiating sex, but are you then also curious about what brings your partner pleasure? What kind of experiences would he be interested in exploring together? And it might surprise you because, again, sometimes there's a stereotype that just men are always just up for sex all the time, right? But, a lot of it is physical touch, right? Like you said, the love languages. It might just be a scratch on the back, a little rub on the head. It might be a hug or just, a handhold or a cuddle when you're watching TV. And being able to have those conversations of our bodies and we are co-creating a pleasurable experience. And we're both invested in making sure our relationship has pleasure.
I love that, co-creating. Sounds so good. Okay, last thing I want to talk to you about is repair conversations. And I think that some guys are like, if you put a bunch of guys in a room and you listen to them, they're like, happy wife, happy life, just say I'm sorry, like just get this over with. And there's a difference when you're the woman and you're like, he just wants this to end versus he's actually hearing me. So what are you teaching men about how to be in conflict, how to repair conflict?
Well, at this point, I love my acronyms, right? Because I'm like, if there's you can break it down into a usable model, you can remember the steps, and then it's practice, practice the skills. So number one is remorse. Right. So an apology is not just sorry, but being able to express what you are sorry about. Right. So the remorse. Also, a big part of remorse is we stop the behavior that's causing pain. There are so many people, like you said, and it goes to all people, but they say sorry, but keep doing the thing. Or they say sorry, but they justify like, well, here's why I'm still doing the thing. And remorse is where it feels more genuine because you're saying, I'm telling you what I'm sorry for, and I'm not doing it anymore, right? So that's the first piece, remorse. And then E is empathy. So you can articulate what your partner experienced when you did the thing that hurt them, right? And then going even deeper into the P is perspective taking, putting yourself in their shoes. So even more than just empathizing with what they experience, putting yourself in a position like that. So being able to say, I can see that from your perspective. If I was in that position, I can see how I would be hurt as well. Right. And again,
and meaning it, like actually doing it. Because there's nothing worse than someone's like, I'm reading the books in Crystal, and here's what I'm supposed to do. Because we need to feel it from here, from your heart.
Absolutely. And that's really where I find that's why I put perspective taking as one step past empathy, because empathy is saying, I'm hearing your experience. Perspective taking is putting yourself in that experience, which is difficult to do when you're not feeling it. Right. So that's that first part of repair. And then A is accountability, right? What are you going to do to make amends? What are you going to do to make repair? I is investigation. Do we need to change anything going forward? Is this a repeating pattern? Like, how can we then work together to say, let's investigate what needs to change here. And then R is rinse and repeat, because, sometimes, and like I say, it's the deeper the wound, the more stitches you need. Right?
Yeah,
so
that's
if you just
so true.
made a simple mistake, maybe it is a one and done with the repair. You remorse, empathize, perspective take, accountability, investigate the change. But if it's a deep wound, you might then need that repeat. You do it again. You do it again. You do it again.
Yeah, because I think it's the Gman Institute that says 69% of a couple's issues are perpetual. Like you're kind of having the same version of the same challenge over and over again.
Yeah.
So, and that's where every time I would guess you're doing that investigation, you're just trying to make a 10% shift to maybe make it a little less.
I like to talk about it as like going up a spiral staircase rather than a staircase that leads you to a new level. Is the problem is going to continue to come up probably for the rest of your relationship, but the goal is to be 2 steps above, right? And that, you increase the recovery, or you decrease the time between the injury and the recovery, right? That's the goal, is to just have that spiral staircase that here it is again, but look, we're so good at getting past it now.
Okay, now everyone wants me to ask this question because I know who listens to this book, and anyone who's in a relationship is like, my man needs to read Crystal's book. But I would guess if you just come home and you're like, read this, it may or may not go over so well. So what's your secret hack to get a guy that you love, who you want to take more responsibility for making the relationship better, to value this kind of growth or learning or connection skills?
And that's really where I go to the, most men, a lot of men that would even be listening to these kinds of podcasts or in this sphere, is they desperately want to do better. They just don't know how.
They don't know how.
Right? And so appealing to that, I know that you want to be the best husband you can be. I know that you want me to feel more loved in this relationship. I know, I see you trying. Here's a tool that will make it easier for you because it's packed with skills, it's packed with tips, it's packed with tools. I read it, I listened to it, I resonate with it. I think it's a manual to me, so here's something that will help you be successful in loving me and being the husband that you want to be. And so really just appealing to that strength-based of, I know you want to do better. I know you want to be better. I know you want this for us. And then also for the women, being able to read it in collaboration as well, right? This can be a joint project because, again, it's not just, all on one person. Nobody can just make a strong relationship on their own. It has to be a joint effort. So that is, again, something that brings you into connection, helps you be successful in deepening your connection, and ultimately having a stronger, healthier relationship for both of you.
Yeah, because if you just go up to someone that you love or who you're in a relationship with and you go, well, you're fucked up and you're bad, so fix your shit. That is not motivating,
Not at all.
at all. And we talk about perspective taking. We wouldn't want someone, and we would never do that in a professional setting.
No.
You wouldn't go to a colleague or someone you're working with and be like, so you suck, get your shit together. I mean, that's not a long-term solution, right?
Yeah. And also, if that's the case, sometimes I do bring it back to, if you are in that kind of relationship where you have that kind of contempt towards your partner, is it, no matter who he tries to be, are you even going to see it? Are you even going to see the changes, right? Because the Gottmans, they talk about contempt being one of the biggest, it destroys relationships, right? And so that's also something. If you're looking at your partner and this person's, useless and terrible, and, he can probably feel that, and it doesn't feel good.
Yeah. I think of everything that you've said, this understanding that you get together with someone because you're compatible. And I don't remember who said it. Maybe it was the Gottmans, but I'm not sure about getting to compatibility is pretty easy-ish, but getting back to compatibility is the golden nugget of a long-term relationship. And so all of these skills and tools are really important because we just weren't taught them at all.
Totally.
And nobody had it modeled to them at all.
Absolutely. And this is also something that, if women need safety to feel love, men need the respect, right? And this is where it's a little bit of a catch-22, because so many of the messages about masculinity is, men get respect when they are good at something. And so it is difficult for men to sometimes admit that they're not feeling very good at being in relationship, or they don't have the skills. And so that's also a piece that I think women could be a little bit aware of and compassionate towards. Is being good at being in relationships is a skill that you do have to learn from scratch. And you do have to have the opportunity to practice it. And, self-respect comes from that as well. Right. And so that's also something I talk about a lot is, for a lot of men who are feeling shame or they're feeling blame about the state of their relationships is, being able to feel self-respect, that they can feel good about practicing these skills. They have a partner who doesn't expect perfection from them, but understands that they're trying, is receptive to the efforts, is working with them, sees the good, is encouraging, is so key to,
It's so good. I remember when I had my first daughter 28 years ago, they brought her in. They're like, okay, you're going to nurse her. And I was like, okay. And I just figured like I would know how and she would know how. And then the nurse was like, no, like you're not born knowing, like you have to learn. And I was like, oh, I thought they just come out and they're like, I know how to do this. I will lead you, even though I've taken 12 breaths, on this planet. And I think that that's what we do about relationships. We just make an assumption that someone knows how to do it, or they have the skills, or they are who we are, who think like we think. And so I really love what you're doing in bringing back this humanity rather than like, these roles or just these ideals of what we're supposed to be, rather than like really understanding you have this like person who just, in the end, we all just want to be loved and belong and be accepted for who we are. And we got to remember that. It sounds so easy in ideal, but the reality is you have to learn how to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're exactly right. I thought that for a while, like, when I meet my person, I'll suddenly be good at relationships. And then I met my person and I was like, oh, I still am terrible at this, which is why I became a marriage and family therapist, right? I went to therapy myself and started to learn the things because I was like, I care about this person. I want it to work. And so again, just trusting that, it is a process. You can be dedicated to the process. It doesn't mean you're going to be amazing at it right away. But also for men, if any men are listening or any women, it's like relationship skills, communication skills, conflict resolution skills. Like skills get better when you practice them. And they also get easier to practice when there's a safe environment to practice them in and also fail in, right? Do yourself a favor, get yourself a supportive therapist, a supportive environment, give yourself all the tools you can to be successful in this. Because, it's not innate. It's not just, wired in. You don't get the husband-wife download when you get married.
With this ring, I hereby teach you everything you need to know to be the best version of yourself.
Exactly. Man. Yeah. And so again, just this idea, I think we need to get away from this myth of the magical mind reading partner, right? And, know that when you are committing to loving someone, you're committing to also teaching them how to love you well.
Aww.
Right? So.
I love that. Ladies, so the website is strong.love to order the book. The link will be in the show notes. Definitely recommending this book to everyone that I know. I'm going to look at it myself because I love me an acronym all day long.
I love acronyms. They're so easy.
I was talking to another coach, Matt Boggs, and he was saying, believe your man can.
Yes.
Right? And so I started saying it. My husband's like, where's the pot lid? And I'm like, believe your man can. Believe your man can.
Oh, yeah, totally. And that is a game changer. It's like, I believe in you, babe. You got this.
You got this.
Rooting for you. You'll find it.
It is. And you know what? It's so funny is like, I had to watch myself because it's obviously easier and takes way less time to just grab the pot lid, right? But to your point, it's like, I want to allow him to have that opportunity to step. That's like a provider thing, right? He's like making dinner or helping me with dinner. And so I'm like, so now he jokes when he's chopping, he's like, believe your man can.
Yeah. And also, speaking to the men too, is like, believe that you can as well. Like you can learn new skills. Like you can learn the skills that maybe you were never taught from your, because again, let's be honest, men in past generations, emotional conversations, emotional intelligence was not high on the list of things to teach our sons, right? And so that's also something that, women have been the kind of nurturers of relationships. And that's where lots of women, whether explicitly or implicitly, have been taught relationship skills. I think there's also a big gap in the acknowledgement that men really haven't been taught that from a young age. Little boys are taught to find value in their performance rather than their personhood. And so again, just there's a big gap here, and we all just need to be a little kinder to each other. And at the end of the day, if we all work together, we can do it. We can make it happen.
We do. And, we wanted to, you're talking about redefining and modern masculinity. And I think that for those of us that are in midlife or that are in second relationships or whatever it is, like we want to do this also for our kids, right? Because we want them with their partners to have this modernized version of how do you communicate. And that will change the world long term for generations to come. And so that's why your book is so important.
Yay.
Yay. Ladies, again, it is in the show notes. You can also go to strong.love. The name of the book, write this one down, is Strong, a relationship field guide for the modern man. Crystal DeSantis. You guys definitely want to check her out. We have had so many practical tips. We got acronyms, we got letters, we got scripts and language. There's so many ways for you in this episode to life check yourself. So do it. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.